Hi, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create basic sequences and how to open tasks based on answers on previous tasks. It is the main way of using Loquiz Visual Games Rules Editor, and I have created a game with 3 tasks in it, and now we are going to create some logical conditions and also some actions. So the basic block that has been used is finished, and how it's used is basically this. When task 1 is finished, then do an action, and let's show something on a map when task 1 is finished. Say and shows task 2 on the map, and it asks us to set a location for the task 2. So let's put it here. Okay, so that is very kind of basic example, and of course what we need to do as well is that we need to somehow get task 1 to open for answering. So what happens in a game is that the player gets task 1 first, answers the task 1, and the task 2 appears on the map. And it doesn't matter if the answer is correct or incorrect. This is the sequence that is carried out. Now the alternative to that would be, and let me duplicate it, alternative to that would be to use something a bit more specific, and then that is how the task is actually answered as well. So let's say that if task 1 is finished correctly, we would open task 2, and let's also say that if task 1 is finished incorrectly, we do open task 2 as well on a map, or show it on a map. So these two blocks, groups of blocks, are exactly the same. Okay, so we have defined the route for both the correct and incorrect answer, and they take to the same question after answering correctly or incorrectly. So you don't need to use correctly, incorrectly here. You can just use the basic, and this is very often what you want to have. Okay, but the usual outcome, or what you would like to achieve with the second option, is that you would like to drive people to different routes. So let's say if you answer task 1 correctly, task 2 would appear on the map, but if you answer task 1 incorrectly, task 3 would appear on the map, and let's give it a place on the map as well. Now this is driving the player two different directions depending on how they answered correctly or incorrectly. And this is pretty good way actually to build scenarios in a game depending on how the answers have been. But sometimes what you want to achieve is that you want to actually not send a player to the new task, but you want to keep them on a task until it gets answered correctly. And let me show you an example of that. So what that should do now, and it doesn't quite do it, but we'll get to that in a moment, is that when task 1 is answered correctly, number 2 task, the blue square, is shown on a map. But if task 1 is answered incorrectly, the task 1 should be opened again. Now, this is actually the correct way to do that. But what sometimes gets people confused is that you also need to check what the actual settings within the task are. And let me open the task, and we'll look at the additional settings. And here we can see there is a group of settings that kind of determine how the task behaves when answered correctly, when answered incorrectly. And there are two main settings. First one is remove the task from the game when answered. Doesn't matter if incorrectly or correctly. And this is the default setting. And if this setting is set, what will happen is that once the task is answered incorrectly, as we want it here, it cannot be activated again because it actually is removed from the game, or we call it deactivated within this game. So what you need to do is you will need to set the task to be in the game until it gets answered correctly, any place in a game. So, and if you set it like that, then this sequence that we have built here, the second one here, let's get rid of the first one, it doesn't help us anymore. This sequence here works. So you open task 1 for answering. If you answer it correctly, you get second task and it gets removed from the game. But if you answer it incorrectly, it actually appears to you again. And this is perfectly valid and it works very well. So what you need to keep in mind is that first of all, if you use correctly and incorrectly, you need to define the scenarios for both. Okay? So because people might answer differently. And the second thing to keep in mind is that if you use this and if you want to refer back to the same question or task, then you need to go and check that you actually have the intended behavior for the task as well. Now the third option is that you keep the task until the end of the game. Okay? So that means that you can refer back to that task. You can always bring that task on in the rules, whatever the answers have been previously for that task. Okay? So that means that you can also, for the correct answer, you can say, hey, show me this task again. But you can't just do it in the rules, because by default, the task actually gets deactivated when it's answered. One thing that you can add here is that you can add a timer, and the timer by default is 60 seconds. So let's say you answer incorrectly, and then it gets locked for 60 seconds. It has two functions as such. One is that it's like a penalty. So you answered wrong, incorrectly, you need to wait. But the second thing is that if you are building location-based games and you want to put that task back into the map, it would open right away. But if you don't want it to open right away, you can keep it on the map and give the team or the player a time to move away from that place. Okay, so that is pretty much it. Maybe one more thing to say is that sometimes what we see is that you kind of struggle with this because of not setting the settings correctly within the tasks. And what you do instead is that you refer the players into the third question, or you add a question that is a clone of first question. So you know what happens is that you answer the first question incorrectly, but this gets removed from the game, and now you add a clone of first question as the third question, and you ask people to answer that. So you can basically build a sequence. The problem here is that if they answer incorrectly again, you would need to build more and more loops into that game. So the correct way to do this is that you can refer back to the same task, but you need to make sure that within the additional settings you have it keep until answered correctly, or keep until at the end of the game, and you can put this timer to 0 so that they don't even notice what happened to them. The task just pops up again. Thanks.